Hey everybody, I'm here today with Chris Butta, who's an experienced technical writer in the video game industry and a current documentation manager at EA Frostbite. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. How's about yourself?
I'm pretty good. A lot of snow in my area. It was -2 today, so it's been very difficult. Um, you get a lot of snow where you're at?
I'm in Vancouver currently, so we did have a snowstorm recently, and folks kind of forgot how to drive. That was very fun, as you can imagine.
I'm from
But yeah.
where I'm from in Virginia. I'm from Virginia Beach, Virginia, and it doesn't snow very often there. So when it does, people they don't know how to act when it does. But I'm going to jump into your first question here, if that's okay. Um, so you're Romanian and you've attended school in Romania and Japan. How do these experiences differ, uh, I guess, in terms of culture or how they operate? And what do you take away from that contrast, I guess, and kind of university culture and life?
Hmm. So that's a very, very good question. It's got a few different facets to it. First of all, university in Romania is free up to your first degree. So you pay
Okay.
for your textbooks. You might pay for lodging if you don't qualify for free lodging, but it was quite expensive in Japan. I was there on a scholarship, so I didn't pay the tuition fees, but the textbooks alone were ridiculously expensive. And that was my first true contact with Western education. It was quite a shock. Beyond that, it felt like Japan had a lot more resources to invest into higher education. It felt that, first of all, the facilities were newer, they had more tech, they were cleaner. Uh, Simple things like they were actually using whiteboards with markers, whereas back in Romania, I think folks were still using chalkboards back in the 2010s. So yeah, in terms of the level of quality and engagement, though. I do feel that in Japan, it was more socially acceptable to be disengaged as long as you showed up. So, for instance, you would have students openly kind of nodding off during class, like just being like that, and the teachers wouldn't comment on that. Whereas back in Romania, I got bollocked for just yawning. I was literally like, and I was sitting like in the second row or something, and the prof actually saw me and he was like, "You there? Am I boring? Do you think I'm boring?" So, so yeah, in Romania, they're going to zero in on that very, very quickly.
Yeah. That's the same here in the United States. People on their laptops, on their phones and stuff like that, and they don't really get in trouble. I mean, it kind of varies from professor to professor, but most of the time, people pretty much get away with it. And I had a similar experience actually. Was yawning in a class today, and I was I was really afraid that the professor was going to get mad at me, but he didn't. Um, so you've studied various topics throughout university and your high school experience, including but not limited to Japanese language and culture studies, social studies, and psychology. You also, when I spoke to you on LinkedIn a little bit, you said you taught yourself some elements of game development. How have these subjects contributed to your overall career as a technical writer and your job now as a documentation manager at EA?
Well, first of all, my degree was useless. Let's get that out of the way. So, I finally got my degree in sociology and organizational management and culture. And then I was not able to get any job with that degree. But it was the only degree I could complete because at the time I was already working full time and I couldn't afford to do another one basically. But the vast majority of the things that I do right now, there are things I learned on my own. So I did teach myself how to do game development. Even before I started working at Unity, I was really interested in doing narrative design. And narrative design is a more technical role. So I started learning about, okay, how do you implement a narrative system in a game engine? And I started with Unity. And then I moved on to Epic Games. I started to learn Unreal, fell in love with it because it was so simple and so accessible. And I can confidently say I'm sort of a mid-level generalist right now. So like if I had to build, for instance, a quest system, I know how to do that. If I had to build some simple interaction, I know how to do that. But the vast majority of this was just through courses, YouTube videos, things like that, resources that are available either for free or for a reasonable price. So like I don't have any sort of degree in anything I do. And technical writing was sort of similar. I actually got my first technical writer job by accident. I was in my hometown back in Romania. I had just come back from Japan and I was in my last year in uni. And I was with my mom at a pub. And she was like, "Well, why can't you just get a job? Go on the internet, look for jobs." And I pulled out my phone. I went on a job board and I was going to show her, look, Ma, there are no jobs. And there it was. It was an ad looking for Japanese speakers for a technical writer position. I was like one of a few people who spoke Japanese on that level in my hometown. And I figured, yeah, I'm going to apply. Why the heck not? And it turns out they needed a translator, but they only needed a translator for like 2, 3 weeks out of like the whole year. And the only headcount they had was technical writing. So that's how I kind of blundered into this career. And I taught myself on the job. And then I much, much later in my second job as a technical writer, I finally had formal training. And that's when I learned the basics. But by then I'd been doing it for like a year and a half already.
Um, a side question, did you have any knowledge in the Japanese language before you had gone to Japan?
I was a massive weeb in high school, like massive. You would not believe. And there were a couple of volunteers from JICA, which was the Japanese Association, sending volunteers to teach the language and culture to folks in other countries. And I met one of them, and I'm like, great, awesome, teach me. And that's how I got started. So by the time I got to Japan, I could speak reasonably well. I could understand reasonably well. The writing was difficult still, but I was able to do 3 years of university before it got too hard. And then I
Gotcha.
had
I've
to
heard
quit.
it.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just, and then I had to quit because it got a little too hard. But yeah,
Gotcha. I've heard that it's a pretty hard language to learn, at least for native English speakers. I don't know in other places, but I've heard it's pretty hard. So congrats on you for for learning Japanese. But before starting your career, and then getting that position that you just talked about, had you known that you wanted to go into writing beforehand, or was it just like I like it and I'll do it? But had you always wanted to pursue something in writing?
I wanted to write stories, honestly. So I went through different phases. Like I thought I wanted to be a psychologist. I thought I wanted to be a developer. I thought I wanted to do this and that. But really what I wanted to do was to write stories. Now, obviously, there were no jobs for people who wanted to write stories. So I kind of saw this job. I'm like, this matches my skill set. I'm just going to go for it because I'm very passionate about putting food on the table. You know what I mean? And I sort of fell in love with technical writing by doing the job, especially after I moved into games and I realized, hey, what I do directly contributes to the studios making these awesome games that I love to play, that I love to see. So I would see, made with insert game engine here, and I'd be like, I worked on that. I did that. I did the educational materials for that. Or like I would see different features used, like with Epic Games, I would see like games that started to adopt Nanite and Lumen. I'd be like, yes, I know the technical writer who worked on that. I saw this feature being developed internally. It's freaking awesome. I was the technical writer on Epic Games' MetaHuman, which is the super high fidelity, realistic digital humans product. And I knew some things were coming down the pipe before they were announced. And I was like, I cannot wait to see these in games. I cannot wait to see what artists do with these things with this technology. And it's a really cool feeling to know you contributed to that.
Awesome. I bet it is. Do you have like every time you kind of like see, like you said, like seeing this game was made with this engine, do you feel like you like check it off and like kind of add it to like a list of other games that fit into that category?
I don't keep a mental tally, but I do know some of my favorite games were made with Unreal, like XCOM 2 and XCOM 2 War of the Chosen, for instance. They were made with Unreal. State of Decay 2 was made with Unreal. I think Days Gone was Unreal Engine 427 as well, if I'm not mistaken. So it's always nice to see.
Gotcha. So from 2011 to 2019, you've worked as a linguist, a translator, a technical writer, and more for various companies. In 2020, you started a position as a narrative designer for Dark Star Games. How did that kind of differ from your past positions that were more technical writing and translating and stuff like that?
Well, the biggest difference was that I worked for free. So at that studio, we worked against RSUs. So we had promised RSUs if we ship the game, if the game is successful. That was one thing. Side note, I do not encourage anybody to do that. Even if you can afford it, it's not worth it. There's absolutely no guarantee your work is going to be seen. And there are quite a few people that did very good work on that game, and that is very likely to never see the light of day because of various reasons. Besides that, though, it was a creative role, so I was working, just being very mindful not to break any NDAs here. But I was working on the quests for one of the major factions in the game, and I got to see what it's like to execute somebody else's vision. So we had a narrative director who had established some factions and some quest mechanics, and I had liberty to do whatever I wanted within the guidelines that the narrative director had set. And it became a situation where I was walking a fine line, and I was like, can I get away with this? Is this in character for this faction? And if the answer was no, then it doesn't matter how good it was or how much I liked it, it would not go. And the other thing that I learned working as a narrative designer on this game was that you have to work within the limitations of the engine and with what the dev team can do. So let's say you have this idea for a quest, but it requires a special mechanic. If that mechanic is just going to be used the one time on that quest and it takes 2 weeks of development time, yeah, they're not going to do that for you, no matter how cool it is, because it's a one and done. That's it, the end of the world. So I had this really cool sequence that I planned and I outlined and I scripted it. Like I had the script written and I took it to the narrative director. I'm like, hey, can we do this? And I was like, yeah, let's talk about that. So, whereas, being a technical writer, it's a lot more definitive. Like, the feature's coming out, you know what it does, you know who it's for, you know what you have to teach those people in order to be able to ship things with it.
Would you say that doing the narrative design position was a little bit more limiting than you had expected?
I knew nothing about narrative going in. I just knew I wanted to write for games, so I learned a lot. I wouldn't necessarily call it limiting, because every medium is limiting. Like books are the same. Books have, conventions you have to stick to, and film scripts have to be a certain length and so on. But rather than limiting, I would just say you have to learn to work collaboratively. Like, even if you're the solo writer on a project, you have to learn to work with a dev team and you have to learn to work with QA and you have to learn, how to direct voice actors, for instance, how to write voice scripts, things like that. So it's a very, very interesting role. It's a shame there's so few of them in the industry, especially at an entry level, because you always see the same few people move around different studios, right, for AAA titles. And the rest of us are down here like, hello, hi, can you? No. So,
Yeah, it's a very
yeah.
hard industry. Um, In 2011, you started writing as a self-employed author. How does this kind of form of writing compare to technical writing or what you designed at Dark Store? I know that you just said that every form of media kind of has its own conventions and limitations, and you mentioned writing in the book form as well. So how would you, I guess, describe that compared to other things that you're more versed in? Or not
Well,
more
right.
versed in, but more
Yeah.
you've done more in your career.
Yeah, writing books is it feels liberating because technical writing is very rigid. You have to write to a style guide. You can only use commas a certain way. You can only use specific verb tenses. You have to phrase things in a very stiff, robotic, kind of simplified way. Whereas books, you can just do whatever the heck you want within reason. But there are some limitations. Like, for instance, as a new author, if you have a manuscript that's like 100,000 words, probably nobody's going to take a punt on you. So you have to stick to like, 60,000 to 80,000 words. And then if you write genre bending fiction, like I read fiction that takes elements from different genres. And my last book is a thriller romance. And am I allowed to show it?
Yeah, you could show it. I'll pop up a picture on the screen, or if you already have the book, yeah, awesome.
Yeah, it's here. So see, this book is a thriller romance. And to sell this book to a publisher, it took a long time because they're looking for clear-cut books that they can put in boxes and say, hey, do you like the Da Vinci Code? This book is the Da Vinci Code set in space, or things like that. And my books don't really fit in those boxes. So if I wanted to be commercially successful, what I could do is bang out like, 5 different thrillers, which are essentially the same story with different characters and different settings. I don't do that. I like to write what I like to write the kind of stories that I didn't get to read when I was younger, the kind of stories that we want to tell. But yeah, and by we, I mean like I'm a Romanian immigrant, right? I'm also a queer person. I'm also a firm believer in, you know, there's no happily ever after. Second chances matter, and you have to make something of yourself. You can't sit around and wait for the hand of destiny to pick you up to be the chosen one. All of these things break the norms and conventions of fiction that is traditionally commercially successful. But I'm doing it anyway, because lucky for me, I'm not making a living out of that yet.
Um, what kind of advice, I guess, would you give to somebody that would like to start writing kind of in that sense, kind of creative writing or writing stories and eventually novels that hasn't really kind of thought about going down that path before? I guess tips for beginners or something like that.
Actually, talk about that. I have a YouTube channel where I do shorts and I give tips and
Okay.
tricks once in a while. But there's two big things. So first of all, learn the rules, learn the conventions. Not because you have to apply them, but you have to know why they're there. and then you have to know how and why to break them. So you break them deliberately. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like my first book, the first draft of my first book that I wrote, I did not do that. I was just like, I'm gonna write on feels and vibes because I like this and this makes me feel good. It was a terrible draft. Nobody wanted to buy it, nobody. And then I went on and I read a bunch of books on how to write books. I read Stephen King's on writing. I read Solstein's Soul on Writing, which is basically the absolute bare minimum rules of self-editing. I read how to read I read How to Write Awesome Dialogue by Tom Levine, and there's a list of books that I went through to learn different components of what makes a story, what makes a book. And then I picked and chose what I want to follow. And that is advice that I believe is non-negotiable. If you're going to break the rules, you have to know why. Like for me, if I want to break the norms and conventions of a genre, I know exactly why. And that is because they don't serve the story I want to tell. It's not just because I'm flying by the seat of my pants, right? And the second thing is sit down and do it. Like there's no substitute. You can think about writing, you can build playlists and mood boards, and you can subscribe to podcasts. That's not writing. And your first few pieces are going to suck. And you have to give yourself permission to be bad. Because even now, my first drafts are absolutely horrible. They're terrible. But I have to get them out there because somebody much smarter than me said you cannot edit a blank page, right? You have to have something, you have to have a starting point. And if you understand the process and if you understand the shape of the story you're trying to tell, you can keep refining it and you're going to end up with something good that is uniquely you. So that is the kind of advice that I would give. I wish somebody who would have told me that when I was in my in my very early 20s, when I was like, I'm smart, I'm talented, I'm above all advice. I was not. I was really not.
I'm actually a pretty big reader myself. So my next question about your novels is which one is your favorite and which one do you, if I would like to read one, so which one would you suggest I read?
Well, do you like sci-fi or do you like sci-fi adventure or do you like more grounded romance thrillers type
I
deal?
like sci-fi. I haven't read a lot of sci-fi, but I mean, I like grounded stuff as well.
Mhm.
So, the sci-fi thriller is cool. Some of my favorite novels are from Blake Crouch. He wrote Dark Matter. I don't know if you've read that. It's a kind of like a sci-fi thriller.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, the sci-fi thrillers are good.
I mean, I think my favorite book that I wrote is this. So, Gifted. It was my very first novel that I actually sold to a publisher. And then the publisher folded, they went bankrupt, but I sold this book. And it's a sci-fi adventure coming of age story. It's part one of a trilogy. I'm working on part two right now. And it's a fairly quick and easy read. It's like 60,000 words. So if you want to pick it up, and I hope you
Awesome.
like it.
I will look into getting that. Thank you. Um,
Too.
so yeah, moving forward here. So you talked about this a little bit already, but you worked as a technical writer for Unity and Epic Games um while at Darkstar. I think you did this in Darkstar at the same time. Do you enjoy technical writing more than other forms of writing? I know that you said that you kind of fell in love with technical writing. Um, but how would I guess you compare it to the narrative design or writing for your novels? And would you say that you like technical writing the most, or how's everything stack up against each other? I know it's kind of a loaded question, but I wrote it weird on there, and I kind of was trying to save it just now. So
It's a good question, though. It's a good question. So, my personal favorite kind of writing is storytelling, no matter the
okay,
medium. So, whether it's a book, whether it's a script, whether it's a quest, I like to tell stories. And that's the whole reason I got into games in the first place. I wanted to move into narrative design. And the reason for that is, technical writing empowers other people to execute their vision. But when I write a book or when I write a script, that's my vision. That's something that only I can bring into the world. And it's not just me, but it's a lot of my inspiration comes from people I've met, from people whose stories I've heard, from just random bits and pieces. And again, that's something that only I can synthesize and put together and get out there in the world. And the next person will have their perspective, and the next person will have their perspective, and so on. So I come from a very rigid education system. Romania's education system is very much about form and norms and conventions when it comes to writing and literature. And I've always loved to break free of that and just do my own thing. So I guess that's where that comes from.
gotcha. Would you say technical writing is harder than any forms of writing? I guess considering the knowledge and time kind of required for some aspects of technical writing. Um, maybe I have it wrong, but I know that technical writing is or I believe that it's very methodical and that you're describing, I guess, steps or aspects of a system or, just things like that. So would you say it's kind of more difficult than other forms of writing, or would you say that there's, some aspects of technical writing that are easier than story writing, or I guess how would you just stack up technical writing compared to other forms and difficulty? Sorry for the other loaded question. This is my second loaded question.
Well, it's been described to me as being soul crushing. Let me put it that way.
Okay.
Because technical writing is the opposite of creative writing. You're operating within some very strict norms and conventions. You have to write to a style guide that you may not always agree with. But the purpose of it is not to be artful or creative. The purpose of it is to convey information very clearly that people understand and apply then in their own workflows. That's one thing. The other thing is, I want to speak from the perspective of a game engine technical writer. And I know there will be people who disagree with me, but this is a hill I'm willing to fight on. You have to be technical. You have to understand the product you're writing for, and you have to understand your audience. So if you're writing for engineers, you have to understand what engineers do. You have to understand how to speak to them, what kind of knowledge you can reasonably assume, and what kind of knowledge they need. You don't just get a workflow from, let's say you've got a new feature and you talk to the developer, and the developer says, yeah, sure, here's the thing, here are the steps, here's what you got to do to get this result. You don't just get what you got from the engineer and edit it, make it pretty, and post it as is. You have to test every step. More than that, though, you have to know, is this actually what the users need? Because an engineer develops the feature, but they'll never use it in production. They'll never know, they're not the intended audience of that feature. So if you test it yourself, if you find a better workflow, you document that. If you find pitfalls, you document that, or you raise them as bugs to the developer. So you have to be technical. You have to know what you're doing. We're not looking for, I mean, again, this might be controversial, but any tech writer who works in this space, who's just a glorified editor of something they get from the developers and nothing more, I believe their job is at risk right now because you can run that stuff through ChatGPT and it's going to do a decent enough job that, yeah, the engineers will be like, yeah, we don't need a tech writer, which is BS. You do need a tech writer. But if all the tech writer does is edit engineering copy, then yeah, maybe you can do that with an LLM instead. I know that's a spicy take, but that's from my own experience.
I'm, I don't think that anybody will watch this and be up in arms about it or anything like that.
Not
No, but
goodness.
something that you did mention, that I actually wanted to ask about was, ChatGPT. Do you think that ChatGPT is, what's the best way to phrase this? Do you think it is in a position that it could make people's jobs harder or take away from your jobs, not necessarily erase technical writing positions or writing positions, but I guess drastically reduce the effort that's required of you or expected of you, if that makes sense?
Mhm.
Or take away jobs if you think that could happen too. But I was asking because I know that you mentioned that, some people just expect that they can put something into ChatGPT or something like that. So,
Yeah. I mean, I've tested several different LLMs and tried to see, okay, is there some opportunity here to actually make this thing do what we do? And the
mm,
answer is no, it's not quite there yet. And for instance, ChatGPT, I was asking it, hey, how do you do this simple Unreal Engine workflow in C++? And it gave me, if it was code that was like hello world, yeah, I was able to do that. It gave me the code, it ran, it did the thing. And it explained it well. But if I went into more complex workflows, it started to hallucinate. It started to make up steps and functions and classes that did not exist, and so on. So I don't think an LLM is at a level where you can say, hey, ChatGPT, write me the documentation for this feature, you know, or write me a nanite tutorial for Unreal Engine. It's not at that level. It might be in the future, but for now, absolutely not. I don't think it's going to take away people's jobs. Let me rephrase that. I don't think it's capable enough to do the same kind of jobs that technical writers do. I also don't think some executives understand that. So I do think some executives will see the opportunity. So yeah, sure, we'll just, we'll pay for a ChatGPT subscription. We're good to go. And they're going to realize the error of their ways somewhere down the line. And we're going to be here to laugh at them when that happens. Where there is opportunity with LLMs, though, is to automate manual tasks that would otherwise take a lot of time. So, for example, if you want to, if you've got Markdown that is of a specific flavor and you need to convert it to a different flavor, yeah, you could do that with regex, you could do that with a script, whatever. Or you could put it in ChatGPT and say, hey, please replace this with that and this with that. And please also make sure that, this is up to the standards of this flavor of Markdown. And then it's good to go, right? But yeah, only for that kind of task, I feel, or for summarizing big spreadsheets. That's the other thing. You just feed it the data. I'm like, hey, so can you please just if you don't feel like running 10 formulas in a Google Sheets spreadsheet, you can run that through ChatGPT. It's going to be accurate
Yeah,
most.
a few of its uses. But so in January, you started as a senior documentation manager at Frostbite. Congratulations, by the
Thank
way, on that. Um, does this, as a senior manager, and a documentation manager, I don't really know exactly how that differs from a technical writer. Does this position carry more responsibilities than previous roles?
you.
And if so, like how much and what ex not what exactly, like you don't have to tell me about what you're doing at EA, but I guess how would it be different than what was expected of you as a technical writer?
So the very simple answer is I lead the team. I lead a
Okay.
team of technical writers and content strategists. And the more complicated answer is, I'm responsible for folks basically for their workload, for their day-to-day, for their performance management, things that every manager in every department does. And then at a higher level, I'm responsible for the documentation product. And that means I set the vision and the strategy of that product. And then I make sure that I get the resources to make it happen, or I creatively work with the resources that I'm being given. It's a lot more responsibility because as a technical writer, you're responsible for the one piece of the software that you document. So if you're the rendering writer, you're going to document rendering features. That's it. You ship your documentation, you're good to go. But you don't have to worry about, what programming is doing, what modeling is doing, what materials are doing, and so on and so forth. When you're a team manager, you have to know what the writers are working on. And you have to know what's the biggest priority right now. What are the most important features that are going to ship with the next release of an engine, let's say, because that's where you have to focus the effort. And then there's different criteria that you use to prioritize those features. You allocate resources to them, you make sure they're covered. And then, you talk to different departments as well. Like you talk to QA, you talk to technical art, you talk obviously to engineering, to developers. It's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of big moving pieces.
Sounds like a lot.
Yeah, a lot of things I can't talk about because they're NDA, but
Yeah.
specific big projects coming down the pipe, you have to react to those and you have to make sure that they have documentation support if required. And like one that I can talk about it is from my days at Epic when I was a technical writer and then a documentation manager for MetaHuman. And so knowing that MetaHuman Animator was coming down the pipe, that it was going to be the keynote speech at GDC, we would do a live demo with a pretty famous actress, and everything had to work. And then immediately people would want to test it. We had to make sure that the documentation is accessible enough for folks who had never done that before, for folks who had never used an iPhone for, facial capture before, for instance. We had to tell them how to do that. We had to tell them how to bring their content into Unreal, how to. It was a huge responsibility, not gonna lie, working for something that was as awesome as that. But it was also very, very rewarding. Documentation was also very rushed, though. That's the other thing. Like we had a documentation plan, and then a few days before shipping, I was told, "Hey, by the way, we need to add these extra pages with this information as well." I was like, "Okay, let's make that happen, I guess." And then I crunched.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Uh, I'm sure that wasn't the best news to receive on your, I guess, timeline. But
yeah.
uh awesome. Well, thanks so much for answering these questions. I've only got a few more, but these are just about you more rather than your experience. Um the first thing, these next two I ask everybody, by the way, but the first thing is what is your favorite game of all time?
Of all time, bloody hell.
Of all
What I
time.
usually do is I pick a game I played for 500 hours and then I drop it for 10 years. But if I had to think of my favorite game of all time, in terms of gameplay, that's Doom Eternal. It's fun,
Really?
it's fast-paced, it's got a lot of interesting mechanics, traversals. A lot of fun modes to keep it fresh. I really, really liked Doom Eternal. In terms of story, it's Detroit Become Human, just because the sheer complexity of the narrative tree in that game and how it all works together, like that is an accomplishment. Not everybody can pull that off. And I actually had the pleasure of chatting with David Cage a couple of times about that, and the man's brain works in like really, really interesting ways. Being able to keep track of all that, being able to execute that in a way that makes sense. I thought that was really good. Oh, and special mention goes to Elden Ring. I have my map up there. That was the
Okay.
latest game that I played to basically 100%
Yeah.
because I got so pissed off in the beginning because it was my first Souls-like, and I kept dying till literally the first mob camp, and I'm like, no freaking way, I'm doing this. And I got to a point where like I could basically do most boss fights hitless, and it took about 500 hours to get there before I'm like, yeah, I'm satisfied. I can drop this. I'm good. So
Yeah.
yeah,
But
I love that
those
game
are
though.
all three games I really enjoy. So you went three for three. Are you excited about Doom: The Dark Ages?
Yes, I'm excited about the game. Are you familiar with the Mick Gordon situation?
Yes, I am familiar, slightly familiar. I think I was caught up with it until like the first or second DLC for Doom Eternal. I don't know anything else after that.
Right.
So
So the reason I'm hesitating to be excited for this game is because Mick Gordon wrote, he was the composer for the old, if you say Doom music, that's Mick Gordon. And he was a composer, and he posted an open letter where he detailed how he was treated by Bethesda. And he named an individual, well, a couple of individuals as well. And I know at least one of those guys is still basically working on the game. And I saw a post on LinkedIn like congratulating and tagging this specific person for the success of the game. And I'm like, I can't really support this knowing how this fella treated Mick freaking Gordon, who's like the nicest person ever. Just he's a good guy. I've never heard anything to the contrary. He's always been nice in interactions with people. So that's the only reason I'm hesitating. So I don't know. Maybe I'll pick it up on sale or something, but probably
that's a
on launch
good.
day.
Sorry, you lagged a little bit. No, that's a good thing for people to consider. I'd even considered that. So,
Yeah.
that's a great point. Yeah. Well, Detroit Become Human. How many times have you played it? Like, how many times have you played through that?
Yes.
Yes.
I was on a quest to 100% the narrative tree to unlock every single
Wow.
brand. But I think I was like on my third. So I did, the good ending playthrough. Well, the first playthrough where I screwed up some things, the good ending playthrough where everybody lives, a Machine Connor playthrough, and then like on my fourth playthrough where I started going for the more obscure narrative choices, I kind of got like, okay, I think I need to step back because this is getting a touch. It's not fun anymore. So
Yeah.
yeah. How
Um,
about yourself?
I played it one time, um, and I've wanted to go back. I did enjoy it the first time, um, and it's a great game. It's just that I think that for me, I can only really play it for a couple hours at a time, just because it is really narrative driven. So like the gameplay is just you just
Yeah.
kind of walk from point A to point B, which isn't bad by any means. If that's what people enjoy, that's what they enjoy. I liked it. I played through it, but sometimes it's just a little slow. But when I played, I think I got a pretty good ending. The only person, everybody survived. The only person that didn't survive was I don't even remember his name. He was I don't remember any of their names except for Connor. And it's probably just because that's also
I
my
wonder
name. But
why. Yeah.
yeah. There's the gentleman who is like almost like the messiah of the androids.
Marcus.
Marcus. Okay. And then so you get to Marcus with the female protagonist and the girl that she's with, and then there's a guy with them, a bigger guy that
Hmm.
I don't remember his name, but he's the only
Luther.
person. Luther,
Yeah.
he's the only one that died on my playthrough, unfortunately. I
Okay.
don't even remember how. I think he like got. I think there was like a part where. And sorry for anybody who's watching who's playing through Detroit Become Human, but this game came out in 2018.
Yeah.
So I think it was like during the part where their base is getting raided, the kind of like the
Mhm.
android, not I don't want
Yeah.
to say rebellion, but more like movement. The base was getting raided, and Luther got caught in the crossfire, and that's what happened. But um, it was pretty good outside of that. I got like a pretty good ending. Do
Yeah,
you have
no,
like a favorite ending or how?
well, I like the Everybody Lives ending, obviously, but
Yeah,
in my first playthrough, I actually got Connor killed at Cyberlife Tower because
really?
early in the game, when you're at Hank Anderson's house, you're supposed to look around his house, and you're supposed to look at this picture of this kid who's his son who died. And much later at Cyberlife Tower, there's Connor, and then there's like a doppelganger. And Hank asks you, my son, what's his name? And if you didn't look at the picture, you don't have the answer. And I didn't have the answer. And I'm like, balls. Okay, now I have to play through this thing again. And I think everybody else survived. Karen Ellis made it to Canada, and Marcus's rebellion was successful because we sang a little song. And yeah,
You sing it the song at the end,
yeah,
like the rebellion. Um, I had Marcus kiss like I had
North.
Marcus kiss North, and then the president or whatever was like, oh well, we can't kill him now, or they're
Yeah.
like people. Um, but yeah, I think the very first thing I had done with Marcus is you're raiding the tower, and I had killed a guard, and then I paused the game and I was like, I can't keep doing this, and then I was good from then on forward. But I've really enjoyed our talk. Thank you so much for speaking with me. Um, Everybody go check out Chris's books. I'm sure they're a great author. I'm excited to check out their book. So check out their books. I don't know what else to check out. Just, your LinkedIn. Anyways, but is there anything that you'd like to add before we call it?
Yeah, if anybody has questions about getting into this industry, about technical writing in particular, you can find me on LinkedIn. If you just look, I'm pretty sure if you look for my name, it's going to pop up. If not, my
Yeah.
LinkedIn URL is literally /in/my name. And yeah, feel free to get in touch. And I'm happy to share what I know. And I'm happy to have a look at your CV, your portfolio, anything you got to share. So, and this applies, by the way, to career transitioners as well. If you've done other things in tech and games and you're interested in tech writer, do get in touch. In tech writing, do get in touch.
Awesome.
And thank you very much for having me today, Connor.
No problem. Thank you so much.